What if everything you've been told about how to be the perfect man is actually pushing love away? I'm serious. Think about it. They tell you, be emotionally intelligent, communicate better, heal, grow, stay calm. So you do. You hit the gym. You journal. You go to therapy. You become the man who listens, who reflects, who doesn't snap back when provoked. You become what everyone says they want. And then you get ghosted after deep conversations, labeled too intense just for being real, punished for not reacting to chaos. And you're left wondering, isn't this who I was supposed to become? Here's the truth nobody prepared you for. When you grow emotionally, you disrupt the emotional games others still need to play. If you don't chase, they lose control. If you don't react, they lose power. If you don't need validation, their influence crumbles. It's not that you're too much. It's that your peace exposes their chaos. And the Stoics. They saw this coming thousands of years ago. So today, we're going to flip everything you think you know about attraction and finally understand why your best traits might feel like your biggest curse until they don't. Let's go deeper. Lesson 1. The paradox of being understood. Here's the first paradox every emotionally intelligent man faces. The more you understand yourself, the less others feel they can manipulate your emotions. And for some people, that's terrifying. When you've done the inner work, when you know your triggers, your patterns, your emotional landscape, you become what psychologists call emotionally self-regulated. You don't react from wound, you respond from wisdom. But here's what happens in practice. She sends that text designed to get a reaction. You read it, process it, and respond with clarity instead of defensiveness. She escalates. You remain calm. She pushes harder. You hold your center. And suddenly, she's the one feeling exposed. Pause. See, most people are used to men who are emotionally reactive. Men who can be triggered, controlled, predicted. Men whose emotions are like open books that anyone can read and rewrite. But you've become unreadable in the best way. Not because you're closed off, but because you're no longer controlled by external validation or emotional manipulation. Epictetus taught, no one can hurt you without your permission. When you truly embody this truth, when you stop giving others the power to disturb your inner peace, something shifts. The game changes. The rules they're used to playing by no longer apply. And that can be deeply unsettling for someone who's learned to navigate relationships through emotional leverage. You're not playing their game anymore. You're playing a different game entirely. A game where your worth isn't determined by their approval, where your peace isn't dependent on their mood, where your love comes from overflow, not emptiness. This is the first fear you awaken, the fear of irrelevance. When you no longer need to be chosen, the power dynamic shifts completely. Lesson 2. Stillness makes her nervous. 4 minutes. There's something about inner stillness that makes people uncomfortable. In our hyper-connected, reactive world, most people mistake emotional turbulence for passion, drama for depth, chaos for connection. But you've learned something different. You've discovered that true strength isn't found in the storm. It's found in being the calm center while storms rage around you. This is what the Stoics called ataraxia, unperturbable tranquility. Pause. But here's what happens when you embody this quality. During an argument, instead of matching her energy, you listen. You stay present. You don't take the bait. You respond with measured words, thoughtful pauses, genuine curiosity about what's really going on beneath the surface. And she doesn't know what to do with that. Because in a world where most men either explode or shut down, you do neither. You stay. You feel, you process, but you don't lose yourself in the feeling. This can trigger what psychologists call attachment anxiety in others. When someone is used to gauging the health of a relationship by its emotional intensity, your calm presence can feel like disinterest. Your stability can feel like disconnection. But here's the truth. Your stillness isn't indifference. It's mastery. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." When you've truly internalized this wisdom, when you've learned to observe your emotions without being consumed by them, you become what relationship experts call differentiated. You can be in intimate connection without losing your sense of self. But this level of emotional maturity can be intimidating to someone who hasn't done their own inner work. Your peace highlights their chaos. Your centeredness reveals their emotional dependence. They might test you harder, trying to provoke the reaction they're familiar with. They might interpret your calm as coldness, your boundaries as rejection, your self-possession as selfishness. But you hold steady, because you know something they haven't learned yet. True intimacy isn't found in emotional fusion. It's found in two whole people choosing each other from fullness, not need. Lesson 3. Your calm unmasks her chaos. 5 minutes. This might be the most uncomfortable truth we'll explore today. When you develop genuine emotional intelligence, when you learn to stay calm in the face of projection, blame, and emotional storms, you become a mirror. And not everyone likes what they see. Here's what happens in moments of conflict or stress. Instead of getting pulled into the drama, you remain present. You listen beneath the words to the pain underneath. You respond to her heart, not her hurt. But your calm presence does something unexpected. It reveals the difference between her reaction and reality, between her story and the truth, between her wound and the present moment. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Your emotional growth represents the ending of old patterns, old ways of relating, old forms of connection that were built on mutual triggering rather than mutual respect. But endings can be scary, even when they lead to something better. When you no longer participate in the familiar dance of emotional reactivity, it forces everyone around you to confront their own patterns. Your peace becomes a spotlight that illuminates their chaos. Your stability highlights their emotional dependence. This isn't your fault. This isn't something you're doing to them. This is simply what happens when conscious meets unconscious, when health meets dysfunction, when someone who's done the work encounters someone who hasn't. Let me give you a practical example. She's having a difficult day. In the past, maybe you would have absorbed her stress, tried to fix her problems, or gotten frustrated when your solutions weren't received well. But now, you offer presence without losing yourself. You listen without trying to rescue. You empathize without taking on her emotional state as your own. And something beautiful happens. You give her space to feel her feelings without having to manage yours too. But it can also trigger something challenging. She might realize how much of her past relationships were built on emotional codependency, how much energy she was spending managing other people's reactions instead of processing her own emotions. Your emotional intelligence becomes a mirror that reflects back the work she still needs to do. And mirrors can be confronting. The question isn't whether you should dim your light to make others comfortable. The question is, are you willing to stand in your truth even when it makes others uncomfortable with their own? Because that's what emotional maturity requires. The courage to be yourself, fully and authentically, even when your growth highlights areas where others still need to grow. Lesson 4. Why your depth feels dangerous. 4 minutes. There's something about emotional depth that feels dangerous to people who live on the surface. When you've spent years developing self-awareness, when you've learned to feel your feelings fully without being controlled by them. When you can hold space for complexity and contradiction, you become what some people call too intense. But here's what they really mean. You see too much. You feel too much. You understand too much. In a world where most people are running from their inner world, your comfort with the depths can feel threatening. Your ability to sit with difficult emotions, to explore the shadow side of human nature, to have conversations that matter. It challenges the surface-level connections that many people mistake for intimacy. Epictetus taught his students, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. When you embody emotional depth, when you live from a place of authentic self-knowledge, you naturally invite deeper connections. But not everyone wants to go deep. Not everyone is ready to move beyond small talk and surface-level attraction into the realm of souls, recognizing souls. Your depth can feel like a demand for authenticity that some people aren't ready to meet. Here's what this looks like in practice. You ask questions that matter. Instead of, "How was your day?" you might ask, "What brought you joy today?" Or, "What's something you've been thinking about lately that you haven't shared with anyone?" You share your own inner world, not oversharing, but authentic vulnerability. You talk about your fears, your growth, your questions about life and meaning and purpose. You create space for silence, for reflection, for the kind of presence that allows real intimacy to emerge. But for someone who's not used to this level of emotional intimacy, it can feel overwhelming. Like you're asking them to go swimming in deep waters when they're only comfortable in the shallow end. This isn't about judging others for where they are in their journey. We all have different capacities, different readiness levels, different comfort zones when it comes to emotional depth. But it does mean recognizing that your depth, your willingness to go to the places where real connection lives, might intimidate people who aren't ready to join you there. And that's okay, because the right person won't be intimidated by your depth. They'll be inspired by it. They'll see it as an invitation to explore their own inner landscape more fully. The wrong person will try to keep you shallow. The right person will dive deep with you. Before we jump into Lesson 5, take a moment to do me a small favor. Hit like, subscribe, and share this message. Your simple action can help more people who are struggling with this issue find the content they need. Thank you for being a part of this. Lesson 5. She can't control what she can't trigger. This is where we get to the heart of why emotional intelligence can feel threatening in relationships. Most people, consciously or unconsciously, have learned to maintain control in relationships through emotional manipulation. Not necessarily maliciously, often it's just the only tools they were given. But when you become emotionally self-regulated, when you develop what psychologists call secure attachment, you become uncontrollable. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." When you live in the present moment, when you respond to what's actually happening rather than reacting from old wounds, you become unpredictable in the best way. Not unstable, unmanipulable. Here's what this looks like. She withdraws emotional availability, expecting you to chase. You give her space and focus on your own fulfillment. She creates drama, expecting you to rescue. You stay calm and let her work through her own emotions. She tests your boundaries, expecting you to compromise your values for her approval. You hold your ground with love but without negotiation. She tries to make you jealous, expecting insecurity. You trust yourself and your worth independent of her choices. This isn't about being cold or uncaring. It's about being so secure in yourself that you don't need to control others. And you can't be controlled by them either. But here's what happens when someone realizes they can't push your buttons, can't trigger your insecurities, can't manipulate your emotions. They might feel powerless. And that can be frightening for someone whose sense of security in relationships comes from their ability to influence and control. Seneca taught, "The willing, destiny guides them. The unwilling, destiny drags them." You've become willing to accept reality as it is, including the reality of other people's choices and emotions. You don't need to change them to be okay. You don't need them to be different for you to love them. But this level of acceptance can feel threatening to someone who's used to getting their way through emotional leverage. Now, let me be clear. This doesn't mean you become emotionally unavailable or disconnected. Emotional intelligence includes the ability to be deeply present, empathetic, and responsive to your partner's needs. But it also means you're responsive from choice, not compulsion, from love, not fear, from fullness, not emptiness. You give because you want to, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. And that kind of freedom, both your freedom and the freedom you offer her to be herself without having to manage your emotions, can be both beautiful and terrifying, because it requires her to show up authentically too, to connect from her truth, not her strategy, to love from her heart, not her fear. And not everyone is ready for that level of authentic connection. Lesson 6. Stoic men break the game 4 minutes. The modern dating game is built on a foundation of emotional reactivity. Whoever cares less has the power. Whoever needs the other person more loses. Whoever can trigger the strongest emotional response wins. But Stoic philosophy teaches us a different game entirely. A game where your worth isn't determined by external validation, where your peace isn't negotiable, where your love comes from abundance, not scarcity. When you truly embody Stoic principles in relationships, you break the game that most people are playing. Epictetus said, "Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants." This applies perfectly to relationships. When you develop emotional wealth, when your happiness, security, and sense of worth come from within rather than from your partner's behavior, you become incredibly attractive, but also incredibly challenging to conventional relationship dynamics. Here's why you don't play hard to get. You simply have a full, meaningful life that doesn't revolve around any one person. You don't create artificial scarcity. You offer genuine availability from a place of choice, not desperation. You don't use emotional manipulation. You communicate directly, honestly, and with respect for both your needs and theirs. You don't need to win arguments. You seek understanding and mutual respect instead. This approach to relationships can be deeply unsettling for someone who's learned to navigate connection through the traditional power games. When you refuse to play by the old rules, when you won't chase when she pulls away, won't get jealous when she tests you, won't compromise your values for her approval, won't lose yourself in the relationship, it forces a completely different kind of connection. A connection based on mutual respect rather than mutual neediness, based on conscious choice rather than unconscious patterns, based on two whole people choosing each other rather than two incomplete people trying to complete each other. But this requires emotional maturity from both people. It requires the willingness to show up authentically rather than strategically. And not everyone is ready for that level of genuine intimacy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and round it the seething waters are laid to rest." When you become that rocky headland, unshakable in your sense of self, unmoved by the emotional storms that would have once swept you away, you offer something rare and precious stability in an unstable world. But you also challenge everyone around you to rise to your level, to meet you in that place of centered strength rather than trying to pull you back into reactive patterns. Lesson 7. The fear of losing power. 5 minutes. Let's talk about something that's rarely discussed openly, the fear that arises when someone realizes they don't have emotional power over you. In many relationships, power is maintained through emotional dependency, through the ability to affect the other person's mood, choices, and sense of self-worth. But when you develop genuine emotional independence, when your happiness doesn't depend on your partner's approval, when your decisions aren't driven by their reactions, when your worth isn't determined by their treatment of you, the traditional power dynamics shift completely. Seneca wrote, "Every change of fortune is either a test of virtue or a punishment for vice. Your emotional growth, your journey towards self-mastery, represents a change of fortune in your relationships. And for some people, this change feels like a loss of control." Here's what this looks like in practice. In the past, maybe she could influence your decisions through emotional withdrawal. Now you make decisions based on your values and your assessment of what's right, regardless of her emotional state. In the past, maybe she could get her way by creating drama or conflict. Now you address issues calmly and directly, refusing to be manipulated by emotional intensity. In the past, maybe she could secure your attention and affection by making you jealous or insecure. Now you love from fullness rather than fear, trusting in your own worth regardless of her choices. This shift can trigger deep fears in someone who's learned to maintain relationship security through emotional leverage. The fear that if she can't control you, you might leave. The fear that if she can't manipulate your emotions, she'll lose influence in the relationship. The fear that if you don't need her approval, she's not as important to you as she thought. But here's the paradox. When you become emotionally independent, you actually become more capable of genuine love, not less, because love that comes from need is really just attachment. Love that comes from choice, from fullness, from the overflow of a complete person. That's the kind of love that transforms lives. Your emotional intelligence doesn't make you less loving. It makes you more loving in the truest sense of the word. You love because you choose to, not because you have to. You stay because you want to, not because you're afraid to leave. You commit because it aligns with your values, not because you're afraid of being alone. But this level of conscious love can be intimidating for someone who's used to unconscious attachment patterns. It requires them to step up, to become worthy of being chosen rather than simply needed. And that can feel like a loss of power, even though it's actually an invitation to real empowerment. The difference between being needed and being chosen is the difference between dependency and love, between fear and freedom, between unconscious patterns and conscious connection. When you understand this distinction, when you embody it in your relationships, you offer something rare, the opportunity for authentic intimacy based on mutual respect rather than mutual neediness. But not everyone is ready to receive that gift, and that's something you have to make peace with. Lesson 8. Your non-reactivity is her mirror. One of the most powerful aspects of emotional intelligence is the ability to remain non-reactive in the face of emotional intensity. This doesn't mean being emotionally unavailable or disconnected. It means having the capacity to stay present and centered even when others are caught in emotional storms. But here's what happens when you develop this capacity. You become a mirror that reflects back others' emotional patterns with crystal clarity. Pause. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only considers what he does himself." When you stop reacting to others' emotional states, when you maintain your center regardless of the chaos around you, something profound happens. Their patterns become visible. The drama they create when they want attention. The arguments they start when they're feeling disconnected. The tests they run when they're feeling insecure. The emotional manipulation they use when they want control. Your non-reactivity doesn't create these patterns. It simply reveals them. And for someone who's been unconscious of their emotional patterns, this revelation can be deeply uncomfortable. It's like suddenly having a spotlight shined on behaviors that previously operated in the shadows of unconsciousness. Here's a practical example. She starts an argument about something small. Maybe you forgot to text back immediately, or you made plans with friends without checking with her first. In the past, you might have gotten defensive, explained yourself, maybe even apologized for something that didn't require an apology. But now you listen. You acknowledge her feelings. You address the surface issue if there's something legitimate to address. But you don't get pulled into the emotional intensity that seems disproportionate to the actual situation. And in that non-reactive space, something becomes clear to both of you. This argument was never really about the text or the plans. It was about something deeper. Maybe a need for reassurance, a fear of abandonment, a pattern of creating conflict to generate attention. Your non-reactivity creates space for truth to emerge, both her truth and yours. But truth can be uncomfortable. Self-awareness can be challenging. Seeing your own patterns clearly can be humbling, and some people aren't ready for that level of self-examination. Epictetus taught, "Don't be afraid of death, be afraid of the unlived life." Part of living fully is being willing to see yourself clearly, both your light and your shadow, both your wisdom and your wounds. Your non-reactivity invites this kind of honest self-examination. It creates the space for conscious relationship, rather than unconscious reaction. But it also requires courage from both people involved. The courage to see truth, speak truth, and be with truth even when it's uncomfortable. Lesson 9. You're not what she's used to. Here's something that might surprise you. Your emotional intelligence makes you an anomaly in the modern dating landscape. Most men fall into one of two categories. Either they're emotionally unavailable and disconnected, or they're emotionally reactive and needy. But you found the middle path. You're emotionally available without being emotionally dependent, present without being reactive, strong without being rigid, sensitive without being fragile. This combination of qualities is so rare that it can actually be disorienting for someone who's used to the more common relationship patterns. Seneca wrote, "The mind that is anxious about future misfortunes is miserable." Most people in relationships are anxious about being hurt, about being left, about not being good enough, about losing control. But you've developed what Stoics call preferred indifference. You'd prefer the relationship to work out, but your happiness and self-worth don't depend on it. This creates a paradox. The less you need the relationship, the more attractive you become. But also, the more challenging you become for someone who's used to partners who are driven by need rather than choice. Here's what this looks like from her perspective. She's used to men who chase when she pulls away. You give space and focus on your own life. She's used to men who get jealous and possessive. You trust her and respect her autonomy. She's used to men who try to fix her problems. You listen and support without rescuing. She's used to men whose mood depends on her mood. You maintain your own emotional stability. She's used to men who compromise their values for her approval. You stay true to yourself while loving her fully. This can be deeply attractive. The security, the stability, the strength. But it can also be unfamiliar and therefore somewhat threatening. Change, even positive change, can be scary. When someone is used to dysfunction, healthy patterns can feel foreign. When someone is used to emotional intensity, genuine peace can feel like disconnection. When someone is used to being needed, being chosen can feel less secure. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Adapt yourself to the life you've been given, but love the people with whom you share it." Part of loving someone fully is accepting that they might not be ready for the level of conscious relationship you're offering. They might prefer the familiar dysfunction to the unfamiliar health. And that's not a reflection on your worth or your approach. It's simply information about compatibility, readiness, and timing. The right person won't be intimidated by your emotional intelligence. They'll be inspired by it. They'll see it as an invitation to grow rather than a threat to their security. Lesson 10. The man who no longer needs to be chosen. This brings us to the final and perhaps most important lesson, the transformation that happens when you stop needing external validation and start living from internal worth. This is the ultimate Stoic achievement in relationships, the ability to love fully while remaining completely free. Epictetus taught, "Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants." When you no longer need to be chosen, when your sense of worth doesn't depend on someone else's approval, when you can love without attachment to outcomes, you become incredibly powerful. Not power over others, but power within yourself. The power to choose consciously rather than react unconsciously. The power to love from abundance rather than scarcity. The power to stay or go based on what serves the highest good rather than what feeds your ego or fears. But this kind of internal power can be deeply threatening to someone who's used to relationships built on mutual neediness. Here's what it means to be a man who no longer needs to be chosen. You date to share your life, not to complete it. You commit because it aligns with your values, not because you're afraid of being alone. You love from overflow, not from emptiness. You choose your partner every day, and you want to be chosen in return, but you don't need it for your happiness. This is the ultimate attractive quality, but it's also the ultimate challenge to unconscious relationship patterns. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." When you truly internalize this truth, when your happiness becomes your responsibility rather than your partner's, something profound shifts in how you show up in relationships. You become less reactive and more responsive, less needy and more generous, less controlling and more accepting, less dependent and more loving. But this level of emotional freedom can trigger fear in someone who's learned to secure relationships through creating dependency. If you don't need them, will you stay? If you're complete on your own, what role do they play in your life? If you're not afraid of being alone, what keeps you committed? These are valid questions that reveal the difference between conscious and unconscious relationship patterns. The answer is simple but profound. You stay because you choose to. You commit because it serves love, growth, and mutual flourishing. You remain present because the relationship adds value to both of your lives, not because either of you is incomplete without it. This is what the Stoics called living according to nature, according to your highest values rather than your lowest fears. But it requires both people to show up at this level of consciousness. It requires both people to be complete individuals choosing to share their completeness rather than incomplete people trying to complete each other. And not everyone is ready for that level of relationship. Not everyone has done the inner work required to love from fullness rather than need. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Your journey toward emotional intelligence, toward Stoic wisdom, toward internal completion, it represents the end of unconscious relationship patterns and the beginning of conscious love. But endings can be scary, even when they lead to something better. Some people will be inspired by your growth and rise to meet you at that level. Others will be threatened by it and try to pull you back into familiar dysfunction. Your job is not to make everyone comfortable with your evolution. Your job is to continue growing. Continue choosing consciousness over reactivity. Continue loving from fullness rather than fear. The right person will not be intimidated by your emotional intelligence. They will be grateful for it. So here's what I want you to understand today. If your emotional intelligence, your self-awareness, your refusal to be moved by drama or manipulation has ever made someone uncomfortable, that's not a flaw in you. That's not something you need to fix or dim or apologize for. That's your power. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. You've realized this. You found that strength. You've done the work to become emotionally self-regulated, internally complete, and capable of conscious love. The fact that this threatens some people, the fact that your peace highlights their chaos, The fact that your depth challenges their surface-level existence. That's not your problem to solve. Your job is to continue being the man you've worked so hard to become. Emotionally intelligent, self-aware, unshakable in your worth. Present without being reactive. Strong without being rigid. Loving without being needy. You were never too much. You were never too intense. You were never too deep. You were simply unshakable. And to some people, to those who haven't done their own inner work, to those who are still living from fear rather than love, that's terrifying. But to the right person, to someone who's ready for conscious relationship, to someone who's done their own work and can meet you in that place of authentic connection, your emotional intelligence isn't threatening, it's inspiring. Your depth isn't overwhelming, it's inviting. Your peace isn't cold, it's the foundation for real intimacy. Keep growing, keep choosing consciousness, keep loving from fullness. The right person will not be afraid of your light. They'll be grateful that you've learned to shine so brightly. If this video helped you find clarity in your own journey toward emotional mastery, subscribe for more insights on Stoic wisdom, emotional intelligence, and building powerful relationships from the inside out. Your growth matters. Your evolution serves not just you, but everyone whose life you touch. We'd love to hear your thoughts or suggestions for future topics, so drop a comment below. See you in the next video.